For thousands of years, one single plant replaced every bottle of shampoo on your shelf. It cleaned hair, clothes, fine silk, rough wool, even Roman togas. And it did all of this without a factory, without a formula, without a single chemical additive. The plant grew wild across Europe and Asia, and for most of recorded history, it was the default. The thing people reached for when anything needed washing. So why did we stop using it? That plant is called soapwort. Its scientific name is Saponaria officinalis, and the word Saponaria comes directly from the Latin word sapo, meaning soap. The name isn't a metaphor. It isn't marketing. The Romans literally named this plant after the thing it does. And when you crush its leaves or boil its roots in water, it produces a gentle, foamy lather that lifts grease and dirt the same way a modern detergent does. Except it was doing this thousands of years before anyone invented a detergent. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Because soapwort didn't just disappear on its own. It was pushed out, deliberately, by an industry that figured out how to manufacture something cheaper and sell it in bottles. And the plant that cleaned civilizations for millennia became a weed growing on the side of the road, forgotten by almost everyone, because there is one group of people who never stopped using it. And what they use it for says everything about what we gave up. But this story doesn't start with soapwort. It starts with a problem that every human civilization has faced since the beginning. Dirt. It was roughly 2800 BC, and in ancient Babylon, someone pressed a recipe into a wet clay tablet. The instructions described how to mix animal fats with wood, ash, and water to produce a substance that could clean things. That tablet is the oldest known written reference to anything resembling soap, and it tells us something important. People have been trying to get clean for a very long time, and for most of that time, the solutions came from whatever was nearby. Fat from animals, ash from fires, and plants. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to the Nile Delta to the hills of Greece, people discovered that certain plants produced a slippery, foamy substance when their roots or leaves were crushed in water. The Egyptians used soapwort plants to wash their hair, mixing the lather with animal fats for conditioning and citrus juices for extra cleaning. They also blended plant oils with alkaline salts to create soap-like materials for treating skin. Grooming was serious business in Egypt. It was not vanity. It was ritual, identity, and status, and the plants they chose for it were chosen carefully. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Indus Valley civilization had developed its own parallel tradition. Archaeological evidence from the site of Banawali, dating to around 2500 BC, suggests that people were already washing with soapberries, a plant whose fruit contains up to 37% saponins by dry weight. They combined the soapberries with shikakai, a plant whose name literally means fruit for hair, and amla, the Indian gooseberry, which was rich in vitamin C and used for scalp strengthening. This three-plant formula was working thousands of years before anyone invented a synthetic surfactant, and the word shampoo itself comes from this tradition. It derives from the Sanskrit word champo, meaning to knead or massage, and it entered the English language in 1762 through Hindi. The thing we call shampoo is literally named after an ancient Indian head massage that used plant-based saponins for cleaning. All of these plants, soapwort in Europe, soapberries in India, worked for the same reason. They all contain compounds called saponins. And saponins are fascinating because they are essentially nature's version of the synthetic surfactants inside every bottle of shampoo you have ever bought. Each saponin molecule has two ends. One end is hydrophilic, meaning it bonds with water. The other end is hydrophobic, meaning it bonds with oils and grease. When you agitate saponins in water, those two-ended molecules wedge themselves between the water and the grease on your skin or hair. Pry the grease loose and suspend it in the water so it rinses away. That is exactly what a commercial surfactant does. The chemistry is the same. The plant just figured it out a few 100 million years earlier. The Romans understood none of this chemistry, obviously, but they understood the result. They grew soapwort deliberately in their gardens and used the foamy liquid it produced to wash their bodies and their hair. Roman bathing culture was elaborate, with public bathhouses serving as social hubs across the empire, and soapwort was part of that routine long before anyone had a word for hygiene as a science. They also discovered that soapwort solution worked as a water softener, which tells you they were paying close attention to what worked and what did not. Roman women washed their hair before festivals and religious ceremonies, and the historian Plutarch described women preparing their hair with plant-based washes before decorating it with flowers for the festival of Nemoralia, held in honor of the goddess Diana. Soapwort produced a gentle enough lather that hair could be washed without damage and then styled and adorned immediately afterward. That combination of effectiveness and mildness is what separated soapwort from the harsher fat and ash soaps that were also available at the time. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything about why soapwort lasted so long. The lather it produces is mild, incredibly mild. It cleans effectively, but it does not strip natural oils the way a harsh alkaline soap does. And that mildness is not a weakness. It is the entire reason the plant became indispensable. Because while soapwort was busy cleaning Roman baths, it was also cleaning something far more valuable: fabric. The ancient Greek physician Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century AD, described a plant he called struthion and noted that fullers used it to clean their wool. Fullers were the textile workers of the ancient and medieval world. Their job was to take raw, freshly woven cloth and process it into something usable. That meant cleaning the wool to remove dirt, lanolin, and grease, then shrinking and compressing the fibers to make the fabric dense and durable. The cleaning stage was called scouring, and it was the most delicate part of the entire process. Use something too harsh, and you damage the fibers. The cloth becomes brittle, or it loses its color, or the weave falls apart. Soapwort solved this problem completely. The fullers would gather the roots of the plant when it was in flower, soak them in water, and extract the mucilaginous, saponin-rich liquid. Then they would submerge the cloth and work it by hand, or, more often, by foot, trampling the fabric in tubs of soapwort solution for hours at a time. In Scotland, this process was called walking. In England, it was called walking. The alternative cleaning agents available to fullers were not pleasant. Some used stale urine, which contained ammonia and did work as a degreaser, but smelled exactly as bad as you would expect. Others used fuller's earth, a type of clay that absorbed oils. Soapwort was the civilized option, the one that cleaned the wool without making the fuller's workshop unbearable. The French called soapwort itself herbe à foulon, which translates directly to fuller's herb. The plant was so central to the textile trade that its name in multiple languages is just a description of the job it did. And this wasn't some backwater practice. The wool trade was one of the largest industries in medieval Europe. English wool in particular was a strategic commodity, and the quality of the finished cloth depended on every stage of processing. Soapwort was not optional. It was infrastructure. I mean, think about that for a second. A single wild plant, growing in ditches and along roadsides, was a critical input for one of the biggest industries on the continent. By the Middle Ages, soapwort had moved from the ditches into the monasteries. Franciscan and Dominican monks cultivated it deliberately in their gardens and reportedly considered it a divine gift meant to keep them clean. Monastery gardens across Europe were essentially the pharmacies and hardware stores of the medieval world, and soapwort earned its spot alongside medicinal herbs and food plants because it was genuinely essential. You could not run a monastery without it. In the 13th century, Italian monks were using soapwort solution as a disinfectant. In the Swiss Alps, farmers washed their sheep with it before shearing, which softened the fleece and made the wool easier to work with afterward. In Denmark, the plant still grows wild around the sites of old monastery gardens, a living trace of the monks who planted it centuries ago. And in ancient Syria, textile workers relied on the same plant for the same reasons the European fullers did. Soapwort was everywhere, because the need it filled was everywhere. And it was not just about wool. By the Tudor period in England, the wealthy classes had developed a taste for elaborate clothing, including the intricate ruffles and fine lace that defined the era's fashion. These fabrics were delicate. They could not survive the harsh lye soaps that were becoming more common for everyday washing. Soapwort was the only thing gentle enough to clean them without causing damage, and it had the added benefit of leaving a subtle luster on the cloth. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't, because here is the quiet detail that makes this whole story click. The same property that made Soapwort perfect for Tudor lace, its extreme gentleness, is the same property that makes it irreplaceable for a very specific job today, one that most people have never heard of. The herbalist John Gerard documented Soapwort extensively in his Herbal, published in 1597. He recommended it as a topical disinfectant and noted its cleaning properties, though he also warned about its tendency to spread aggressively in gardens. Gerard wrote that once Soapwort had taken root in any ground, it was impossible to destroy. Nicholas Culpeper, the famous 17th century herbalist, echoed many of Gerard's observations and recommended the plant for treating skin conditions and respiratory ailments, though modern understanding suggests he overstated some of its medicinal powers. By this point in history, Soapwort had accumulated a small dictionary of nicknames, and each one tells you something about how deeply embedded the plant was in daily life. Latherwort, because of its foam. Soaproot, because the roots held the highest concentration of saponins. Fuller's herb, because of the textile trade. Crow soap, dog cloves, hedge pink, lady by the gate, farewell summer. Sweet Betty, Joe run by the street. Few plants in Europe had more folk names, and few plants deserved them more, because Soapwort touched nearly every part of ordinary life. And the most charming nickname of all was Bouncing Bet. There are two stories behind the name. The more common one is that Bet was an Old English name for a washerwoman, and the bouncing referred to her vigorous, rhythmic scrubbing motion as she worked clothes against a washboard, her arms pumping up and down while the Soapwort lather did its job. The other version claims that Bet was 18th century slang for a barmaid, and that barmaids would clean pint glasses with water and a sprig of soapwort at the end of the night. Either way, the name tells you the same thing. Soapwort was so woven into working life that the people who used it most became part of its identity. If you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. We cover forgotten histories like this every week. By the 1800s, Soapwort had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. The Puritans brought it to North America, and once established, the plant spread across the eastern United States and into southern Canada with the same aggressive energy John Gerard had warned about 2 centuries earlier. It colonized roadsides, railway embankments, empty lots, and abandoned fields. Soapwort didn't need anyone's permission to thrive. It just grew. And for early American settlers, it served the same purpose it had served in Europe for millennia. Before commercial soap production became widespread in the 1800s, a quick trip to the garden for a handful of soapwort leaves was the standard way to get clean. You boiled the leaves and roots, strained the liquid, and used it to wash yourself, your clothes, your dishes. Simple, effective, and free. Soapwort had survived the fall of Rome, the collapse of the medieval wool trade, the rise and fall of entire empires, and the crossing of an ocean. It had been the default cleaning agent for most of Western civilization for well over 2,000 years. For most of that time, nobody questioned it. Nobody needed to. The plant worked, it was free, it grew everywhere, and the knowledge of how to use it was passed from generation to generation as naturally as cooking or farming. And then, in the span of about 50 years, it vanished from everyday life almost completely. Not because it failed, not because something genuinely better came along, but because the economics of cleaning changed and the plant could not compete with a factory. The story of how that happened starts in Germany in 1903. A chemist and entrepreneur named Hans Schwarzkopf, whose surname translates to blackhead, developed one of the first commercially available hair washing products, a powder that customers could dissolve in water and apply to their scalps. For a few pennies per packet, you could buy something that promised cleaner, softer hair. This was new. Before Schwarzkopf, the idea of purchasing a dedicated product for washing your hair barely existed. People used whatever they had, Castile soap, egg yolks, herbal infusions, vinegar rinses, or soapwort. Schwarzkopf's powder was a modest beginning. Schwarzkopf himself died in 1921, but his wife Martha continued running the company, and in 1927, under her leadership, the firm introduced one of the first liquid shampoos to the European market. Now, washing your hair required no preparation at all. No boiling roots, no straining liquid, no growing anything in a garden. You just opened a bottle. But even this early liquid shampoo was still soap-based, which meant it was still, at its core, doing the same thing that plants like soapwort had always done, just in a more convenient package. The real break from nature came 7 years later, and somehow it gets worse. Because the early liquid shampoos were still soap-based, and soap had a problem. It reacted with the minerals in hard water, leaving a chalky, stiff residue on hair that made it dull and difficult to manage. People had dealt with this for centuries by rinsing with vinegar or acidic solutions, but it was a hassle. The soap industry knew it needed something better. In 1934, Procter & Gamble, the Cincinnati-based consumer goods company, launched a product called Drain. Drain was the first shampoo made entirely with synthetic surfactants, containing no soap at all. The key ingredient was an early form of what we now call sodium lauryl sulfate, a laboratory-created molecule that did the same job as a saponin molecule, grabbing grease with one end and water with the other, but without any of the hard water problems. It dissolved cleanly, left no residue, and could be manufactured in enormous quantities at low cost. That's not a typo, by the way. The shampoo industry replaced a molecule that plants had been producing for hundreds of millions of years with a synthetic copy that worked slightly more conveniently in hard water. The saponin in soapwort and the sodium lauryl sulfate in Drain do the same thing at the molecular level. They are both amphiphilic. They both grab grease with one end and water with the other. The difference is that one grows in the ground for free, and the other is manufactured in a chemical plant and sold in bottles. Drain was a hit. By the 1940s, surveys found that half of all American households were using a dedicated shampoo product. By the 1960s, that number had climbed to 80%, and by the 1970s, daily hair washing had become the cultural norm in the United States. Driven in part by advertising campaigns that featured hair icons like Farrah Fawcett and Christy Brinkley, asserting that it was unhealthy not to shampoo several times a week. The message was clear. Modern meant chemical, natural meant old-fashioned. And soapwort, the plant that had done the job for free since before the Roman Empire, became a roadside weed that most people walked past without a second glance. But soapwort wasn't completely abandoned. And the people who kept using it are the most interesting part of this story. Walk into certain museum conservation departments today, in London, in Paris, in workshops across Europe, and you will find textile conservators doing something that would look completely familiar to a medieval fuller. They simmer soapwort roots in water, strain the liquid, and use it to clean fabric. Not just any fabric. The most fragile, most irreplaceable textiles on earth. Tapestries woven 500 years ago. Silk vestments from the Renaissance. Lace that would disintegrate if you looked at it wrong. The National Trust in Britain has used soapwort to clean its most delicate historic textiles for decades. And the reason is exactly what you would expect. Historic textiles are among the most fragile artifacts in any collection. They are easily damaged by insects, mold, light, heat, humidity, and, critically, by the wrong cleaning method. Synthetic detergents, even the mildest modern formulations, can abrade or chemically alter protein fibers like silk and wool. The alkaline content in many cleaning products breaks down the molecular bonds in old fabric. Colors fade, fibers weaken, threads snap. When you are working with a tapestry that was woven in the 1400s, there is no second chance. You cannot order a replacement. Centuries of history disappear in a single wash cycle if you choose the wrong product. Soapwort does none of that. Its saponins clean gently enough that the fabric is left undamaged, and the plant actually adds a slight luster to cloth, The same quality that Tudor-era laundresses noticed 400 years ago. Modern science has confirmed what experience taught those laundresses. Saponin molecules reduce surface tension and lift dirt efficiently, but their interaction with natural fibers is far less aggressive than that of sodium lauryl sulfate and its chemical relatives. So yeah, not great. The shampoo industry spent a century building synthetic replacements for a molecule that nature already perfected. And the place where the old molecule still wins is the one place where getting it wrong means destroying something priceless. If Soapwort had stopped there, it would already be a remarkable story. A plant that outlasted empires, built an industry, cleaned the hair of countless generations, and was then quietly replaced by chemistry that was cheaper, but not necessarily better. But the story has one more layer. Soapwort never actually left. It is still growing, right now, in every temperate region of the Northern Hemisphere. It lines railroad tracks in Ohio. It spreads through vacant lots in New York City, where its wide white flowers and honey-like scent attract moths to piles of building rubble. It blooms pink and white along country roads in England and France and Germany, exactly where it has always grown. The plant grows between 12 and 36 inches tall, produces clusters of pale pink flowers from midsummer through fall, and is hardy enough to survive in zones 2 through 8. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil, but is not picky about much else. Gerard was right. Once it takes root, it is nearly impossible to remove. The plant is so hardy, so invasive, and so indifferent to human attention that no amount of neglect has been able to kill it off. And there is a growing number of people who have started paying attention again. The no-poo movement, which began in the 1970s as a backlash against the daily shampoo culture, argued that chemical shampoos strip essential oils from the scalp, forcing the body to produce more oil, which then requires more shampooing, creating a cycle that benefits shampoo companies and nobody else. That movement never went mainstream, but it planted a seed, and in the decades since, interest in plant-based alternatives to commercial cleaning products has grown steadily. Soapwort sits right at the center of that conversation. You can grow it in a garden, boil the roots for about 30 minutes, strain the liquid, and use it as a gentle shampoo. Some people add rosemary or chamomile to the infusion for fragrance, because soapwort on its own does not smell particularly appealing. You can use it as a face wash for sensitive or acne-prone skin, a laundry rinse for delicate fabrics, or a general household cleaner. The recipes have not changed since the Middle Ages because they do not need to. The chemistry works. It has always worked. And modern research into plant-derived surfactants has confirmed that saponins are gentler on skin and hair than the synthetic alternatives, which is why some natural cosmetic companies have started quietly adding soapwort extract back into their formulations. The plant that industry forgot is being rediscovered by the same industry that replaced it. The plant also carries a warning, which is worth mentioning because soapwort is not harmless. Saponins are toxic if ingested in large quantities, causing severe vomiting and diarrhea. The plant is poisonous to fish, which is why it should never be planted near ponds or waterways. And in its eagerness to grow, soapwort can crowd out native plants if left unchecked. It is useful, not innocent. But the real question soapwort raises is not about shampoo. It is not really even about plants. It is about what happens when an industry replaces something that works with something that sells. Soapwort did not fail. It was not inferior. It was not abandoned because synthetic surfactants cleaned better. It was abandoned because synthetic surfactants could be manufactured, bottled, branded, and sold at scale. The economics changed. The marketing changed. And within a few decades, thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about a common, freely available plant simply evaporated from public memory. We did not forget soapwort because it stopped working. We forgot it because someone figured out how to charge us for the replacement. And that is a pattern worth paying attention to, because soapwort is probably not the only thing we forgot. Every modern convenience replaced something older. And in most cases, the older version was not as bad as the new version's marketing needed you to believe. The question is not whether soapwort was better than shampoo. The question is, How many other soapworts are out there, growing wild on the side of the road, doing exactly what they have always done, waiting for someone to remember? Soapwort's full Latin name is Saponaria officinalis. The officinalis part is significant. In botanical naming, that word means the plant was once recognized by apothecaries, sold in their shops, and considered officially useful by the medical and practical establishments of its time. It was not a folk curiosity. It was an approved, documented, commercially available product in the original sense of the word. Today, soapwort has no official status whatsoever. It is classified as an invasive weed in parts of North America. Gardening guides warn people about its aggressive spreading habit. The same plant that cleaned Roman senators, washed medieval wool, preserved Tudor lace, and still saves irreplaceable museum textiles from destruction is, according to modern classification, a nuisance. The real question isn't whether soapwort deserve to be forgotten. It's how many other things we've lost without even noticing they were gone. If this story surprised you, you will probably want to see what we cover next. We have a video on another piece of everyday history that the modern world quietly erased, and it is just as strange as this one.